Hello and welcome to the Professional Artist with Echo Chernik. Ah, I am Lazarus Chernik, and I am guest hosting again. Echo still has deadlines. You're listening to the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 out of New Orleans, simulcast on YouTube and Facebook and Twitch, I believe. Uh, so last week, I again was guest hosting, and I briefly touched on photo reference. And this week, Echo thought it was a great idea that we should do an entire episode on it. She intended on doing it. We were going to do it together. And then somebody called and asked her to do something over the weekend. That's how illustration works. So she also reminded me that this is a radio program primarily, and talking about showing images and things was probably not the best way of working. But we're talking about photography today. I'm not going to refer specifically to images, except maybe the one on the background for those who are seeing it on screen. I mentioned this one last week that I had a photograph side by side between a model posing and myself posing. For the exact same image. For those who can't see it, there's a very attractive young woman in her underwear and negligee and a cape, and she has a basket. She's kneeling down in front of a basket, and this is for an image of Little Miss Muffet. And I am showing her, and I am posed similarly, but actually trying to show her how to get more gesture out of it. My side by side, while she is definitely more beautiful, that my pose is more dramatic, that she has her hand covering a lot of her face. She's very rigid and standing upright, and she is sort of glancing pensively. My pose is much more dramatic. I have more angles. The hands are not in my face. They're not covering up my body. And I'm trying to give a little bit more of a glance, but I didn't nail it in this photograph. And then again, maybe it's because I'm looking at myself. I don't feel that I did. So this is how we work together. And now, she is a professional model, and she knows how to do. I think she was just a little confused about the language. She knows how to hold her body into pose, but she does specialize in sexy poses that are, I don't want to say more generic, more common. There's actually a set of about 40 to 50 poses to show off your body. But when you're an illustrator and you're trying to tell a story in the illustration, you don't just want a generic pose. You need something that tells the story. And she needed to be coached a little bit through this. So let's talk about reference for artists. Now, there is a very bizarre thing that goes back, I don't know, decades, centuries, where non-artists have the belief that artists just they just put whatever they imagine down on paper. And personally, I don't have any proof of this, but I believe a lot of it has to do with some of these art books, specifically for comics and cartoons, that come out and show how you can construct the body using shapes and construct the face using shapes. Without having to use any reference whatsoever. What if you don't read the books and you're just looking at the drawings? It can give you the impression that you don't need to ever actually look at a human body. You can just imagine it. The reality is that these shapes really help you when you are looking at the human body. And once you've trained a lot and seen the human body and drawn from it from life in practice, you can then use these tools of breaking down the body into shapes and laying out the shapes for perspective, and then apply what you have memorized from the human body. Interesting take when you're talking about animations, cartoons, comics. those are primarily interested in reproducing the same characters over and over and over and over again. Uh, Oftentimes from the exact same poses, exact same shapes. Uh, there will be charts in professional houses where they'll draw the same character, their head, from about 12 to 24, maybe even 30 different positions, but they have the artist memorize these positions and then they just reproduce them over and over and over again. If you pick up any comic book, you may notice that many of the character faces are identical, not just from character to character, but from comic book to comic book. And these are all various reasons for this, but comics require so many different illustrations in such a short space. They can't use reference for everything. They have to memorize. They have to have a preferred look and a preferred face. But each artist will have their own version. So, Jim Lee, for instance, will have his preferred face styles. He might have a few different versions for, one for villains, one for women, or maybe two different women, different men. That J. Scott Campbell definitely has his preferred style, and you'll see each of these artists primarily draw the same character in the same face over and over again, maybe changing some of the proportions. Again, I'm not criticizing them all. This is a nature of their business, that they need to generate stories and illustrations, very many of them on the same across many pages in a short period of time, that they practice these over and over again so they become easy. However, outside of comics and cartoons, and I'm going to put manga and anime in that camp, that outside of that, illustration requires a lot of customization. You may see a lot of pinup artists that seem to reproduce the same image over and over and over again. That goes back well over 100 years, several centuries, actually. There are common poses that that are used in pinups. Actually, modeling schools even teach very specific set poses for presenting clothes or presenting the human form. That, again, limited poses because they're trying to teach people and just get things right the first time. I'll talk more about models specifically, but models historically have been a critical part of artists' training and the actual art. You can look at drawings from centuries ago, even thousands, even 1,000 or more years ago, of people drawing from reference. And so models and props are absolutely critical. Many of the drawings and paintings that you will see of models and still lifes in museums and things, many of them were actually practice. Yes, they would paint a bowl of cherries and they would try and get them as perfect and accurate as possible, and that would be up there. But in the same museum wing, you'll find another painting that tells a story, maybe from the Bible or from history, and all the skills that they used in the still life were then used and applied to this grand story. And so, yes, someone will want to hang those fruit up there, but they're not necessarily putting it up there as we love fruit. They're hanging this work of art as in we recognize the technical skill of this artist, and often because they can't afford to commission the grand piece that they were trying really hard to do. And technology has been a part of this all the way back. That there have been plumb bobs, there have been wireframe grids, as early as the Middle Ages, architects and artists, and probably much earlier, would take a wooden frame, like a box. Sorry, not like a box, a frame as a rectangle, and they would string wire across it in grids and triangles, and they would prop it up in front of what they were painting, and they would use that, and then they would draw the same grid on their canvas, and then they would match everything up. This is how they would paint as accurately as possible what they were seeing. And it was a huge step towards developing and understanding the concept of perspective drawing. If you have difficulty drawing perspective, using this grid is still perfectly acceptable. And if you can even take a photograph of something, draw a grid and pencil over it, 1 inch squares, half-inch squares, then draw it out. It doesn't even have to be the exact same, half-inch squares on your photo and 1 inch squares on your canvas or your paper. And then it'll help you line things up. This is literally something that was used by Van Gogh, by Leonardo da Vinci, by Michelangelo. This is not a new thing. It has been used forever. And no one looked back at them and said, well, you're not a real artist because you're using technology. I dare anyone to say that to Michelangelo or Van Gogh or Leonardo da Vinci. That they were so common that they were actually sold. They were made en masse, and there were some that you can see pictures of them, and artists would even draw themselves using them. They would be collapsible. They would fold into little briefcases with legs, and they would drag them out. So if they needed to do a portrait, there's one famous drawing or etching of an artist who has gone to see a bedridden man and is going to paint their portrait. And so they literally, the portrait is in the bedroom, and this man is lying in bed, and the artist has taken this briefcase and put the legs down, flipped up the lid, which is a grid, and then they set up the easel with their canvas. All right. So drawing from reference is critical. It wasn't until the invention of photography that reference could be something other than what you physically have. Between there was a product called the camera lucida. And the camera lucida was a tool that would allow someone to fix their eye to a very particular location and fix a grid over a very specific object or scene, and allow them to actually see both the canvas and their scene almost simultaneously. It depends on the exact model of lucida, camera lucida, and that they were still used up until well through the 20th century. One website says in the 1980s there was somebody who was still using it professionally. I'm like, I can't guarantee that either way. But again, this was a way of getting things as accurate and perfect as possible. Photography introduced a huge huge opportunity for artists, that they no longer need to be in front of something. They didn't have to worry about their fruit spoiling. They didn't have to worry about their model sneezing or moving or dressing. They could just take a picture and then draw from the picture. And it just vastly improved the volume of work that someone could do. You will see paintings do this. Painters use this. You will see painters who have used this, because you'll see the same model repeated frequently in the same piece. There are some famous 19th century pieces that are group shots of women for fairies or nymphs or something. And it'll be maybe, the image will be like 12, 15 women all scattered about a field in a forest, bathing or frolicking and on swings or something. And It'll be the exact same woman in every single piece. And yes, they could have had the same woman pose this for each picture one at a time, but based on this timeline and the absolute ridiculous complications of that, that poor model having to stand there, it's pretty much a guarantee that they use photographs. They photograph the same model in all these different pieces and then compose them together afterwards. Alphonse Mucha, famously, one of the most famous illustrators in the world, in history, he used photography. His museum has his photographs. There are books of them, photographs, not just photographs of himself, the photographs of models. You can see images side by side of the images that he used and the artwork he created out of them. And there are obviously differences because as an artist, you don't draw things exactly the way you see them. You draw them the way they're supposed to be. So yes, the hair might be out of place. Sorry, not out of place. The hair might be in a different position. Fingers might be in a slightly different position. But you don't guarantee that the photograph that they're showing is the exact one they used. But there are other ways of doing it that I'll talk about later. Before photography and another aspect. Sorry, I'm looking at an outline here of what I want to talk about. I got skipped over something. I'll have to talk about it later. There are challenges with photography. One is if you're going to use multiple photographs of multiple things and then composite them together. Alphonse Mucha, for instance, would trace on tracing paper the two images, put them together, and then trace both of those to have them together. So you would have multiple drawings, and you would composite that way. Now you can use a program like Photoshop or some photo tool and cut and paste the different elements out. The same problem, same issue occurs in both practices. You need to be sure that you're taking photographs from the same angle and lighting conditions. It is quite a tragedy to see an exquisitely painted painting and see a model with one lighting condition and at one angle, and then something else related to that model or figure or object that is different lighting conditions, and the artist wasn't paying attention. There are some famous examples, but I won't call anybody out. It's a very tricky thing, and but it's something that really, really has to be worked on. You have to make sure that your reference all goes together properly. And as I said, the old adage, you don't draw them the way that you see them, you draw them the way they're supposed to be. So if the lighting is wrong in the image, you can't just throw your hands up and say, well, that's the way it looked. That's not how you're supposed to create art. Another issue is lens warp. Over the years, there are many, many, many different kinds of camera styles, different lenses. The human eye is a lens. It has a range. It's flexible. It can see things. It can focus in different ways. Cameras don't always see the way the human eye does. They can see differently. They can see close-ups the way human eye can't. They can see wide angles. I'm sure everyone who has ever used a camera phone has wondered why when they take a photograph of the moon that looks so big in real life shows up really, really small. That is a difference in camera lens, camera warp. And when you're taking a photograph of a human being up close, you may not, you are not looking necessarily at a single point in time at a model. You are probably looking at different body parts, each individually, focusing on each one. Well, the camera doesn't do that. It just takes everything and it will change its perspective. And it will change perspective. Elements of the body, the figure that are furthest away from the center of the lens are going to be the most distorted. They're going to be pushed back. Obviously, there are ways around this. There's different types of lenses. You can position at different distances. But ultimately, you as the artist are responsible for overcoming that. This is something that non-artists won't even notice. It's subtle, but it really is important. In film and camera, there's a saying that the camera adds 10 pounds. That's lens warp as well as some other features. When you do a close up on someone, that you know the uh, uh, the camera lens will warp someone's face to actually be more fuller. So in order for it to look thin and pretty, someone may have to look emaciated before taking the photograph. Uh, this is also why a human being in real life may look slim and trim and perfectly fit, and you take a photograph of them and suddenly they don't look like they do in real life. It's awkward. You, as the artist, have to make this adjustment. Which brings us to AI image generated reference. AI image generated reference is, number one, stolen art. It is illegal. It is stolen. Everything that is put into it has been stolen, copyrighted. And one day we may no longer have, the influences blocking justice for those who have been stolen from. But at this point in time, it is open to all. But let me warn artists, not just because it's illegal, but because because the stolen art, it is literally copying other people's mistakes. It is not presenting you with actual things. It's presenting you with what other people have done and what their mistakes have been. Yes, there is sometimes some 3D modeling involved in it, yet in order for it to render, it has a digital lens. And that digital lens has been trained on many, 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 many different artists to represent what other artists have done, what other photographers have done. And when you compare any of those to real life, they're awful. They're just god awful. Now, yes, you might need years of practice and training with the human eye to be that skilled of an artist to see it instantly. But once you do, it's horrific. And if you can see an artist who uses AI reference instantly, because, well, the perspectives are all wrong. The objects are in the wrong place. Again, not to call anybody out, but I saw a piece someone was trying to promote themselves with, and it was a figure on a stairwell in an alleyway with buildings, with all these different lanterns dangling off the buildings behind them. And they were claiming that they had done this entirely on their own. They had used their own reference and put it all together. It was so obvious that it was AI because the stairs and the steps didn't match. I mean, they were literally put and stitched together in ways that no human being would ever do. If you were an artist and paying attention, perspective, stairs don't look like that. They don't line up that badly. And if you're being the one who's stitching them together, you should really pay attention to that. Now, of course, maybe they didn't. But then the lanterns. This was the same building, had not only multiple designs of sconces, they were broken. Literally, there were actual spaces of the sconces that were missing. I mean, that there were metal pieces ornate, but then there would be gaps between, in the metal in such a way that literally the lantern itself was suspended in midair. And then each of these sconce designs across the building were completely different. No artist makes those decisions. No artist copies and pastes and puts something that they don't understand down without seeing it. Now, okay, maybe there is a wild chance that this artist was just that bad. But if you're going to try to argue between whether you are really bad artists or you're using, you know, AI generated tools that created bad reference, there is no good decision. Just be better on both ends, you know. Um, and of course, lens warp. God, lens warp is just disgusting. You can, another thing AI doesn't do is control the focus of where you're looking, and you can only do that as an artist. That's called the visual hierarchy. Maybe that's for another time. Okay. About actually taking your own photo reference. When do you do it? Obviously, you do it before you need it. If you have a client and the client is willing to give you the time and money to do the reference, you do it after you get the contract signed, and you make sure that you get paid up front, so that you can buy what you need, the props and everything. It used to be that before digital photography, that you had to buy the film, you had to get it developed. Sometimes, if you couldn't develop it yourself, you would have to have time, leave time for a developer to do that. You may still want to do that nowadays because there's different things. Echo and I actually had apartments in New York City, and every apartment that we had, we made sure to have a walk-in closet that we turned into a photo developing studio. At one place, we had a huge master bath that we did that with. It drove our it drove our real estate agent people nuts because everyone wanted walk-in closets, and we were using them for dark rooms. Yeah, so she would take black and white photographs en masse, and then she would develop them herself in the bathroom. I would, do the props and the costuming. I would help her pose. I would help do the lighting. And, but if you do not have a client, or you don't have a client yet, you always need to keep a catalog of reference. You can go to a magazine, but if you go to a magazine, maybe you'll find 2 instances of an apple, but neither one of them may be the apple that you need when you need it. Just take a dozen pictures of an apple. Buy an apple and just take a bunch of them. Take from all different angles, different lighting conditions. Just do it, especially with digital photography, that you're just using storage space, nothing else. If you wander into various unique stores and buy unique props. Fantasy artists already know this. They love going to Renaissance fairs, and they justify buying swords and armor and jewelry as props and writing them off if they're used to a work of art. Sci-fi artists buy really cool props, and they will make their own because, of course, if in the future a lot of things don't exist, so they turn into prop makers. We have trunks, we have closets. For one point, we had our own, public storage place for all of our props for things for use with models. And we also got friends who had really cool hobbies. So, sorry, I'm just running on, trying to get back on topic with my outline. Buy props whenever you see them, whenever you can, and take photos whenever you can. And if you are in a situation in which you are taking photographs for a client, there's no reason why you can't fit in other photographs to be used for future projects, maybe for that client. Maybe the client is paid for, the client's paid for a prop. They paid for the prop, you might as well use it. If they paid for a model, well, maybe they paid for a half day of the model's appearance. Well, you have another half day you could use and pay them a full day's rate, and use it all. So, and if you do what Echo does and goes to conventions or goes out to meet cool people like festivals and things, keep contracts and consent forms with you. You can even Echo sometimes uses a contract website, an app. I'll have to ask. Well, we'll put a link to it in where we can. It's a contract website. You can just write it up, and you can just do everything through your phone. You can just email a link to the person. They can click on it and they can fill it out. I'll talk more about that later. All right, a little bit about still life photography and product photography. Props. Obviously, buy as many props as you can, but you may be given products and props to take photographs of by a client. You can. Sorry, I got to back up. The most important part of taking a product photo or prop photo is lighting. Lighting conditions are everything. I already said make sure that your lighting matches everything in the image. Okay? If you're taking photographs yourself, you can control this. If it's going to be a product photo and it's just used by itself, lighting is even more important. You need to show off the product the best possible way. Yes, you can modify things in a program like Photoshop, but get the photo as clean as possible. How do you do that? You can go onto the internet and purchase what's called a light tent. A light tent is essentially, it's an old tent, but they get various sizes, usually stark white, maybe with some reflective surfaces or special fabrics. And then lights go outside or inside of it and provide a clean glow, lighting a small object from all different sides. And it should have a small window for you to put your camera lens in so that neither you or the camera reflects, obviously, in the product you're taking a photograph of. The more reflective the object, the more critical this is and more difficult it is. Often, you take a photograph of something shiny, you have to then go in and clean it up and paint over the reflections. I've done that thousands of times. And this, related to plastic items that are reflective as well as metal and jewelry and gemstones and windows and frames, especially glass frames. If you're going to take a photograph of a work of art, it's a good idea to just take the glass out, put the art before taking the photograph, and then replace the glass later. There are tutorials you can find online and books to learn about how to light properly. The three most important ways of lighting are the glow, which you use primarily a tent for, a 2 to 3-point lighting. 3-point lighting is best for three-dimensional objects that need to look good in in general, and that is a light behind the camera and a light behind the object, and then a light to the left or right of the object. These can be supplemented with reflectors. You can just, as long as you have bright enough white objects, if you have a bright enough white surface and background for the object and a bright enough white object to reflect, maybe a sheet of paper, a piece of cardboard, something painted white, a single light source can be bounced around the object and give you a 2 or 3-point lighting condition. 5 points is much more complicated and is much more important for video and film, but that's what people are doing nowadays. It's also incredibly important for figures and scenes, because the reality is that there are so many light sources in real life that you need to be able to offer different angles and different lighting. So if you have a figure in 3 to 5 point lighting, and then you have an apple that's presented in 2 point lighting, they aren't going to match. You have to be very careful. If you are presenting a figure who is being primarily lit from the right, you can't give them an object that's primarily lit from the left, or put them with a horse that's primarily lit from the left. It's just going to stand out as being wrong. It's going to have that uncanny valley thing that is just not going to work out. Then, of course, you have different lighting colors. I won't go into a lecture on color theory, but you will use a primary color, like a warm light for the primary, and then you'll use a secondary light, maybe a gel or a filter or something that is going to be cool, or reversed, cool versus warm. These are all very important. I recommend you try and stay with the same lighting color as possible, and turn almost maybe most of your photos into black and whites before you draw from them, because you're going to want to make sure that your illustration is consistent all the way through. And if you use color references, it is very easy to accidentally do warm with, to flip your lighting conditions following the colors too much. Backgrounds, lighting, props, I talked about that. Model photography. God, I love model photography. And I don't mean just being in a room with models. I just love the energy that comes of working with a model and turning a project into a group effort. There are professional models out there. There are semi-professional models out there. There are amateur models out there. And there are well-meaning models out there. Well-meaning models are, of course, going to be family and friends, whoever you can find, and they will stand how you tell them to stand, and they will hold objects when you tell them to hold objects. They're very useful when you can, but they require a lot of effort. They just obviously happen to be the cheapest. You may not even have to pay them in pizza. Amateur models are people who really, they love the idea. They are outgoing. They may have a personality that leads them to want to be a performer, maybe on stage, maybe a musician, maybe just an influencer. Maybe they just like looking in the mirror at themselves and seeing what they can do, and seeing how they can make themselves look. Amateur models are amazing, and they can be, well, they run the gambit from being wanting to learn everything and being really, really shy, and then being terrified of everything. Like, what have I got myself into? As the photographer, as the person leading it, or being an art director like myself leading the studio, you need to try and warm them up. You need to entertain them, get them involved in it, make them feel comfortable. It's very important, because amateurs can give you incredible results that you weren't expecting if you give them the opportunity. The best story that we have from it is that for an amateur model is Echo had a project where she was doing a bunch of witches and vampires years and years and years and years ago. And she traveled back home to visit her family. And her brother introduced her to a friend of his in high school, a young woman. She was 18. She could legally sign a consent form. And she was lovely, and she was thin, and she had a little black dress, sleek, that would look good. And they went out into the woods to take photographs. And this young woman complained incessantly. She was tripping. It was cold. It was the wrong time of day. It was too bright, that she wasn't really having it. And she just didn't want to be there. And Echo's like, all right, we'll just get this done as quickly as possible. She said, and Echo said, stand by this tree right here. And here, she picked up a stick off the ground that was kind of gnarly, handed it to her, said, okay, this is your wand. And I'm gonna go over there. And I said, actually, you just point the wand at me. And Echo went over there, looked, and the girl, raised her arm, pointed the stick at the camera, and just held it. Echo took the photograph. They left. And Echo was miserable. She was like, that was a waste. She took the camera out. She went into the dark room. She took photos. She developed the film, developed the image. And somehow in the 250th of a second, this young woman transformed into this vicious hell beast of a witch with furrowed brows and a snarl in her cheeks, and an arm that twisted and gnarled and accentuated the branch and the wand, and the other hand stood like rigid, like straight down there, like was dragging energy and power straight out of the swamp at her feet. It was incredible. It was an incredible photograph. So you can't judge people until you look at the image. So amateurs can be amazing. Semi-pros. What goes from amateur to semi-pro is a semi-pro is someone who, like cosplayers, for example. Cosplayers are pros to some degree, but they specialize. And they specialize, and it's usually not their full-time gig. And they will do what's called mirror time. Mirror time is they look in the mirror and they actually practice looking good at the camera. They practice what angles they look best at. They take photographs of themselves to do this, and they don't charge much, or they just post their photos online to get charged, to charge things themselves. Again, rather limited in their poses, but again, it just all depends. The greatest cosplayer we ever worked with as a model was Yaya Han. Just out of all the photographs that Echo and I have taken of her, primarily Echo, I only took a few, that over 90% were good. The woman knew exactly how she looked on camera, how to make herself look good on camera, how her cheeks should be posed. Every time the camera moved, she adjusted herself slightly, perfectly. This is a woman who I'm not going to call her semi-pro. I'm going to call her definitely a pro, but she falls into that realm of I would have expected her to be semi-pro because she's a cosplay model. You can find semi-pro people all the time. Often they're dressed in costume, not just in cosplay or Renaissance. Semi-pro people also, they dress well. They just know how to put themselves together. Approaching a semi-pro person is a little awkward. Approaching an amateur or someone is a little easier. Usually you meet them in a casual situation. Obviously, the first tier people you already know. Semi-pro people are people that they need to trust you. You need to have a reputation, or at least you need to get introduced, or you need to be in a position where you have a camera with you and you can talk to them about and show your portfolio and show what you do. The final tier are the pros. People will actually do it, maybe not permanently for a living, but they are pros. They really, really know how to pose themselves. They've practiced. They may have gone to school for it. They may be dancers. This is their job. They're actors, and these people are the greatest that you want to work with. I'll back up a little bit. Um, Nude models and exotic dancers, people who specialize in adult entertainment, I will fill into the semi-pro instead of pro. Not because of any knock on them. It's that they do specialize in posing in very particular ways that are not always appropriate. Remember how I talked about Yaya knew exactly how she should look in every situation. The the models we know from the adult industry know how their bodies look to elicit a very specific image on the camera. And if if you want one of those people to look demure, they have a hard time with that. If you want them to look, uh, to look at an object in a way that isn't deliberately sexy, they haven't practiced that. Obviously, this is generalization, but you are going to have to work harder with one of them than you will with someone who is a professional general model. Professional models fall into different categories. You have swimsuit models. Swimsuit models, obviously, their bodies are going to be different. They're going to be more taut and fit and used to showing off their bodies specifically in specific ways. They also are used to trying to elicit a specific pose, but uh, they're also used to working with a art director who's trying to direct them to do something different, something to stand out. Then you have fashion models. Fashion models they're used to things a little bit more avant-garde. They're more used to awkward situations that they're put on. They're used to showing off clothes. Figure-wise, they don't have the same figures as swimsuit models often. But so you're going to use them for different places or different reasons. You can ask them to do different things. Asking a fashion model to pose in a bikini, you're going to get different poses than asking a bikini model to pose in a bikini. Asking a male fashion model not to clench his jaw is going to be a bit of a challenge. Finding the pros, you really have to go through their agent. The easiest way of dealing with them is you meet them in person, make sure you have a business card that looks professional, and ask, like, excuse me, are you a model and do you have an agent? A semi-pro person, an amateur person is going to bristle. They're going to think, oh, this is a scam. Someone who's a professional is going to, when you mention agent, going to say, yes, I have an agent. And they'll have a card. Here's my agent. This is their business. This is their livelihood. They're not going to look down on you for asking a professional question. And if they have an agent, you can then say the question like, hi, I am an illustrator, not an artist. I'm an illustrator. And what's your day rate? And they'll tell you a day rate. Every once in a while, you'll get someone who will, put off and say that my agent deals with that. But overall, you'll get a professional who will say, my day rate is $100 a day, or $200 a day, or $1,000 a day. Again, the question is more of making sure that you sound professional when you're talking to them to get their attention. You're not there trying to schmooze them. You're not trying to get a date with them. You're trying to do business and talk business. You can ask them if they have an hourly rate. And every once in a while, sometimes you'll meet a model who will be willing to work with an illustrator away from their agent because their agent might just allow them to. The agent is trying to get them fashion jobs that will pay $1,000 a day, of which the agent gets to take 300-400 a day. And that's great for the model. But, an illustration might want to pay $100 for half a day. The agent doesn't care so much about that. They're like, yeah, go ahead, do it. Get your name out there. Yeah, just go ahead and do it. Book that yourself. It's not even worth the $40 to them to pester and make arrangements with the illustrator. So you can find professional models, that will be willing to work with an illustrator. If you have a website with a portfolio, or you're able to show a portfolio to the model after this introduction is made, then you can show them and say, this is, after a rapport has been built up with them, then show it to them. These are professionals, know what they're looking for. They're looking at quality. They're looking at how they're going to be represented, and they're looking for, will it improve their brand? They don't mind doing fantasy or sci-fi. That's, they literally live in a world of fantasy. That's their job, is to be a fantasy. Whether they putting on a crown to pretend to be a princess, easy. Put on wings to be an angel or a Valkyrie, piece of cake. Holding a sword, they dying to do that. You will not believe the number of professional models I've known who have been dying to have someone take a picture of them with a sword. Guns, that's a little, that can be a little politically sensitive depending on the person. Some of them, but you can't judge until you show them. So professional models you're going to get a much higher rate of return on that. As I said, I was like a 90% successful photo rate. Now we're talking about hundreds of photos. That was ridiculous. We've had professional models that only do 60, but I guarantee you those 60% of the photographs you take, especially if you take 2 SIM cards with, is going to be vastly superior to the number you're going to get from an amateur model. And you won't have to work anywhere near as hard. It's also great because you can just say to a professional, like, do something with your hands, and they'll already know different things that they can hold with their hands. I think the best model Echo ever worked with was a nude model. I won't mention her name because I don't know if she wants to, but who posed, and she could do anything. She could pose. She had control over every single muscle in her entire body. She would do new shots. She could control each of her toes and change them and position them. And she would go, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? And Echo would say, do something with your hands. And she would do something with her hands that would be amazing. And Echo would say, can you move your third finger in a little bit? And she could do it. Really expert. And she didn't have to always look sexy. She could change her pose. She could hold products. She could hold props. She wasn't Botox. Please avoid any model that uses Botox, which is a hard thing with swimsuit models because they're very commonly do that. You need emotion and expression in your people. And when you use someone who has Botox, you have to work so hard to to overcome that. Let's see. When you're taking photographs of a model, make sure if someone has a pose that you like, take as many photographs as you can of different angles. Jump up, kneel down, lie down on the floor, move left, move right. Move into different. Take photographs of their hands from different angles, of their feet, of their hair from different angles, back up, because you're going to need to compose this and control how the eye looks, the visual hierarchy again of how someone looks at something. If you just use the single photograph, you are just destined to follow lens warp, and it's going to be much more difficult to create a masterpiece. Legal. The last thing I'll talk about are the legal issues. I have 5 minutes left. So first of all, disclaimer, I am not a lawyer. I have just worked with a lot of contracts and copyrights. I do not know everything. I know a lot, and some of the things that I know may have changed So I'm going to generalize and insist that you look up and do your own research. But number one is copyrights. You can buy photographs from other people. Make sure that you are buying licensing rights that allow you to use it in a work of art. And make sure that you're buying licensing rights that will not conflict with anybody else's. You can use reference taken by somebody else or use photos used by somebody else for another purpose and change it for your use. There is a huge caveat to that. Okay. You need to make sure that you make it your own, which is one of the reasons why you don't paint it the way you see it. You paint it the way it's supposed to be. If you use a photograph of someone else's apple and you paint it into yours, you have to change the lighting. You have to change the color. You have to change things of it. You're not using it exactly unless you're painting it. You can use photographs of models. Just make sure that you don't have to change their pose, but you have to change the context of the pose. What does it mean? Why? Try not to use their face. Try to use a different person's face. Sometimes Echo is literally Frankensteined models together using the eyes of one model, the nose of another, and cheeks of another. If you do it carefully, you will create a new human being. And that actually exists out in the world. Echo can tell you stories about that at some point. So make sure that you understand copyrights and copyright laws related to it. You can Google that information. The contracts for working with models are called consent forms. A consent form is a simple form. It's less than a page that just informs the artist, the model, that these photographs are owned by the photographer or the artist, that they're signing away their right to control what they are used for in it, and they are and being compensated with money or something. You have to say that they're being compensated for something, because without being compensated, even if it's $1 or pizza, that it can be called invalid by a judge at one point. You have to make sure that it says they don't have any control over it. Some models will have likeness rights that pros will have to you'll be concerned with. But if you're working with a pro, and you can afford a pro, you're not going to have an issue with that. That's going to be the client's issue. Sometimes try and get the consent forms to say that you own them, not the client. All right. Every once in a while, the client will say, "Well, you own the photographs." So, that has to be written into the contract, and they have to pay you for them. That's going to be separate than just hiring the model. Consent forms need to also include to make sure that they are legally allowed to sign it. It has to say that they're of a legal age, 18 plus, or they have to have an agent. Echo's taking photographs of children and their parents have had to sign them. You need the names and dates and age. You need the date, obviously, their age at the time, if necessary. It's a good idea to include their driver's license number or something. That sometimes there are models that only want to give their model name. Well, that sounds all well and good, and you could trust that, except that that's not legally binding on either of us, and then it can become an issue. But if that's what they want, that's what they want. You just need to make sure, their address is good. Mailing address is good. I don't think it's mandatory. Some contact information is important. Telephone number or an email address, some way of being able to reach them over any legalities with it. Again, this is, that is going to be a legal distinction. Whether you need their address all the time, I don't know, but you need contact information all the time to reach them. We are up, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to look for take any questions. If you post them up, we'll try to Echo will try to address them next week. Or you could always email us, echo@echo-x.com, or myself, Lazarus at echo-x.com. This has been The Professional Artist with Echo Chernik. I am Lazarus Chernik, guest hosting for her this week on March 25th. It is episode 45. And you've been listening to the United Public Radio Network on 107.7 New Orleans, simulcast on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. Thank you very much for your attention.